Hi, everyone. Welcome to Big Questions. If you could get your sandwich and come and sit down, that'd be great. Cool. My name is Emily, and I'm your host for today. Whether it's your first time here or you've been coming to Big Questions for every week since you came to Cambridge, it's lovely to see you. Big Questions is a chance to ask, discuss, and investigate big questions about life, its meaning, and the claims of Jesus. Today, we'll be exploring the question, what does it mean to be significant? I was just looking up on the student newspapers articles about Week 5 blues, and I read on the tab, Phoebe Gargaro says, "My Week 5 blues experience wasn't triggered by academic overload, but the realization that I'd taken on too much. My ambition had certainly gotten the better of me, and in terms of extracurriculars, I was spreading myself too thinly. I felt as though I was everywhere at once, while simultaneously achieving nothing." That might be an all too familiar feeling, or if you don't feel that way yet, you might start feeling like that when Week 5 comes. And that's why today's topic is actually so timely. I'd just like to invite Glyn, our speaker, up to introduce himself. Great. Glyn, who are you?
It's a big question. Who am I? Well, my name's Glyn. I'm a dad. I'm a husband, Louise, a grandfather. And I was a psychiatrist until a few years back. In fact, I was an academic psychiatrist, a professor of psychiatry, most of my life at Bristol University, before that at Nottingham University. As I was saying last night, I loved being an academic. I was a very driven academic, very research-oriented. And now I've retired. I love not being an academic, not because there's anything wrong with that at all, but there's other things in life as well, and this is one of them, giving me a chance to talk about issues to do with my faith and also with some of the psychological insights that I gained over those years. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
Great. Sounds good. I should just say before the talk starts that there'll be time for Q&A after, so you can text in your questions to the number displayed on the pillars around you, or there'll be a mic going around so you can ask your questions in person. Great. I'll pass this now to Glyn.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you again for coming and allowing me to share a few thoughts with you. Standing out, what is our significance? There was a colourful character called Ed Koch, who was the mayor of New York a few years ago now, and famously he would go around greeting people, shaking them warmly by the hand and saying, "How am I doing?" Which was a kind of a colourful, interesting spin on the traditional New Yorker greeting, "How are you doing?" But in those words, he betrayed one of the worries of what's on the mind of politicians all the time. How am I doing? What do you think of me? And a few of us here are going to run for office, I guess, but the research literature on self-esteem suggests that unconsciously we're all asking that question every day in almost every human encounter. How am I doing? What do you think of me? Of course, we didn't really need psychologists, like many things. We didn't really need psychologists to tell us this. Back in 1798, Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, as he's called sometimes, he wrote this: "To what purpose," he said, "is all the toil and bustle of this world? What is the end of greed and ambition, of the pursuit of wealth and power? Is it to supply food and drink and clothes? No," he said, "the wages of the poorest laborer can supply them. What then are the advantages of that great purpose of human life, which we call bettering our condition?" Well, what was his answer? He wrote this: "To be observed, to be attended to be noticed." The struggle for recognition, it propels us forward. It's a core motivating factor in the human psyche, and I wonder whether you see that in yourself. And of course, there'll be a few here, and you're thinking, no, in all honesty, I don't think I struggle for people's recognition, thank you. I'm captain of my own ship, and when I win, that's a matter for me, not for other people. And I don't care what other people think of me. Well, we don't have time just now, but there's some pretty good psychological evidence that suggests that for most of us, there are a few psychopaths among them, but for most of us, we care about what people think far more than we imagine. And here's the thing. Why are we like this? Because, you see, it's one of the ways in which we can gauge our basic sense of significance, self-worth. And a basic sense of self-worth is important to us human beings because it's what forms the foundation of confidence. It's what allows us to reach out into the world and to believe that we've got something to give and that there's a difference to be made and that I can make it and that I'm capable of loving someone and that they're capable of loving me and I'm capable of receiving that love. Basic self-worth, it's integral and important to who we are as human beings, that we have significance. So here's the question that really we're here to think about briefly. If self-worth is so important, on what or on whom do we base it? Do we found it? Do we build it on? And generally, we tend to come up with two answers. The first, we've already touched on. It's the esteem of other people. So when they esteem us, we esteem ourselves. You base your self-worth on people's recognition and approval of you. And the way to get recognition is achievement. So we burn the midnight oil, we go the extra mile. It starts in primary school when you bring home the teddy bear for the brightest kid in the class this week, or you get the star, and then it runs right through to your place at Cambridge and on to your annual bonus and the size of it compared with others, right through to your place on the New Year's honours list or not. And when things are going well, success is intoxicating, isn't it? You remember when you got that place, when you got those results? You've never felt more alive than when you're successful, because now we're worth something. We're a human being, fully alive. The problem is, of course, what happens to that model when we stop achieving, when you get old, like me, when you retire, when the invitations to speak at national conferences stop coming in, or you used to be the plenary speaker and now they just want you for the seminar. Or you get disabled, or you fail, or no matter how good you are, young bucks are coming up and bright younger women are overtaking you as well. And you're just not good enough, and your position in the pecking order is going down with the size of your bonus. Now what are you worth? Well, we're in Rugby World Cup season, aren't we? And of course, you remember the last time we won the Rugby World Cup was back in 2003. No, you won't remember that at all, will you? Because you're about age 4 or 5. Maybe you do. But 27 seconds before the end of that match, somebody, you maybe heard of him, called Johnny Wilkinson, scored that dropped goal that won the game for England. And he became a sensation with that kick. He was a national treasure overnight. This was everything that little boy who'd first gone out onto the field, age 8, had dreamed of. And pictures of him were everywhere, the sense of poise and concentration as he looked toward the goal, the perfection of the kick. Everything he'd dreamed of never more fully alive than that moment as he's carried off the field on their shoulders. Except in his book, Tackling Life, published about 5 years later actually, he said within hours of that kick, not days, not months, within hours of that kick, I was spinning out of control. He said, I've always struggled with a fear of failure, and I didn't know how to control it. He said, you see, I'm only ever as good as my last kick. And that's the problem with achievement and hanging your worth and your significance on it. You're only ever as good as your last kick and how others esteemed it and whether they noticed it. It's the boom or bust ego. It's great when you're up and it's terrifying when you're down. So it is not a good idea, and you may want to discuss this a bit later, to chase the ego a highs of other people's recognition. Then what is? What else can we can we base our self-esteem on? Well, that brings us to the second common area. Instead of looking for other people's approval, you can give it to yourself. Cue the rise of the self-esteem movement in the middle of last century, about 5 decades ago. And here psychologists, therapists, counselors, they seem to play a master stroke because there's only one reliable way to avoid having to rely on other people's approval, isn't there? And that's simply to rely on your own. And nobody can take that away from you. You declare yourself. You award yourself that worth. And all it depends on is the strength of your will. It is non-contingent. Now, we might be on something, and self-esteem ideology gained enormous traction in Western culture, and particularly in pop psychology. Believe in yourself. Hey, you be you. Just believe. And the legacy of that movement is everywhere around us still. You're special. Just believe in yourself. I am the architect of my own life. I build its foundation, and I choose its contents. I have been given endless talents, which I begin to utilize today, now, this minute. Creative energy surges through me and leads me to new and brilliant ideas. Goodness me, one study showed that 50% of North Americans utilize self-affirming statements like this at least once a week. And it sounds great, doesn't it? So what's the problem? The problem is there's no evidence that it works. That's why I talk about the legacy of the self-esteem movement, because it's failed. It hasn't produced the goods in terms of human flourishing and well-being that it promised. And if you want to talk about some of the evidence, come and, again, talk to me afterwards. We don't have time. But I want to tell you about one study. It was by Joanna Wood, who's an academic in Ontario, University of Hamilton, Ontario. And she did an elegant trial of what use are these self-affirming, self-boosting statements. She actually put it to the test. And she took a group of people and divided them into 3 groups, randomized them into 3 groups. And the first group, they got a bunch of cards with these self-affirming statements on them. You know, creative energy surges through me and leads me to new and brilliant ideas. And they were instructed over a 3-month period to have a kind of a selfie meditation time. And they were to look at each of these cards in turn and absorb them, absorb their positive message for themselves. Okay? So that's this group. The next group, they were given the same set of cards, but a different task. They were told every day to have the same 20-minute meditation time. But as they went through the cards, to say to themselves, how is this true and how is this not true of me? Okay? And the third group were told do nothing at all. So how did they get on when we compare them at 3 and 6 months? with baseline measures done blindly. The people who take the measures are blind to who's in what group. Well, groups 2 and 3, to be honest, haven't shifted much, but there had been some changes in group 1. The people who, at the beginning of the study, had a sense of low self-worth, who scored themselves as being low on significance and self-worth, at the end of the study, after rehearsing these statements, felt worse than at the beginning. And Joanna Wood says these kind of self-boosting statements, they seem to work for people who already feel good about themselves. So Donald Trump, for example, he'd do great on them. But they backfire, she said, for the people who need them most. Why? I reckon because it's just our own propaganda. It's just you saying what you're worth. And sometimes that's not good enough. So, where do we go from here? If seeking other people's approval isn't reliable, and relying on your own self-affirming doesn't really do the trick, on what do we base our sense of self-worth? And there are different ideas out there. One of the big ideas to emerge from psychology is at least to try and be part of a story bigger than yourself, whatever that might be. Some kind of story that's bigger than you, that you're a part of, some mission that you serve, rather than it's all about me, you see. I think there's something in that. But really, this is where psychology now is venturing out of the sphere of science into the sphere of philosophy, the marketplace of ideas. These are big, ultimate questions that aren't scientific questions. Ideas about meaning. Why are we here? What are we for? What is our purpose? Who am I? And there are different answers to that question. I love coming to universities because they should be, and I hope are, a marketplace of ideas. So I really want to say a big thank you for letting me put up my stall here and share some of mine, because I want to share what the Christian worldview has to say about this issue of self-worth. Does it have anything to say? Well, you see, Jesus of Nazareth, and you've got in front of you these Gospels, and I hope you'll take one away, and especially if you're just thinking about the Christian faith or looking at this stuff, or take one away and read this biography of his, Luke's Gospel. But Jesus of Nazareth, he loved to tell stories, really simple stories, but usually with a big punchline. And in chapter 15, beginning at verse 4, don't bother looking it up now. Here's one of the stories he told, okay? And I'll read it straight from here. He said, supposing one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them, does he not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And I want you to imagine a load of country folk around him, ordinary people who know about sheep and they know about wilderness and open spaces, and they know why shepherds need to be out there with their sheep, protecting them in the wilderness. And Jesus says, does he not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And they go, yeah. And then they go, no, nobody would do that. Nobody leaves 99 good, healthy sheep in the wilderness to be ravaged by whatever and goes out and looks after for the lost one. I mean, can't you do your maths, for goodness sake? And unfazed, Jesus goes on. He says, and when he finds it, the sheep, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And he calls his friends and neighbors together and he says, rejoice with me, I found my sheep. And they're thinking, I don't think anyone would do that. They'd be thinking, who's going to break the news to this numpty that now he's lost the other 99? Or at least a good chance of a few. And then maybe the twinkle in Jesus' eye, and he says, and I tell you, there'll be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner that repents than over 99 righteous who don't think they need it. Boom. Jesus is saying God's love is reckless to the point of risking everything for the one who knows they're lost. And I think there are two big messages in this simple little story. Like that sheep, Jesus is saying, we're more lost than we'll ever know. And like that sheep, we're more loved than you will ever imagine. Those are the 2 points. More lost than we'll ever know. What does that mean? Well, in the Christian story, this is about our human propensity to screw things up. That's what it means. We all know we screw up, that there's despite our best effort, no matter how hard we try at times, there's a crack running through everything. Stuff in there that a shadowy side to us. Sometimes we feel it has its roots in a dark place. And I was chatting to a guy, I mentioned this last night, but I was chatting to a guy in London 2 or 3 weeks ago, and a young guy, and I said, well, what brought you to London then? And he said, I came here to find myself. That's interesting. I said, are you interested in religion? And he said, no, I'm not interested in religion. I've come to find myself. And we had a little conversation, but then I said, but what if the person you find you don't like? What if when you've found yourself, you say, but I don't like what I see? What then? And this is the lostness that the Christian gospel talked about. Jesus called it sin. One sinner that repents. And it's a kind of an old-fashioned word, but it means the crack that runs through everything. And if we're honest, we all know that we screw up, and it separates us from God, and it separates us from each other, and it leaves us feeling orphaned. And like that sheep, we are more lost than we'll ever know. But the Christian story is, but more loved than you could ever imagine. Because in the Christian story, the shepherd recklessly comes after the one who knows he's lost. He comes after the one who wants to be found. He comes after and lays down his life and draws into his own body on a cross the crackness, the darkness in our souls, to put it right again and to restore our relationship with God. And that's just the Christian story. That's what Christians say is the good news. And of course, the Bible calls that grace, which you perhaps sung about. Amazing grace. Every time you sing that, even if you're not a Christian, you'll sing it at some point, even if it's at a Stormzy thing. You'll say it at some point. Every time you say it, remember that lost sheep. Remember the shepherd with this stupid, reckless going after it. Leave the others, it's you. And of course that love is a love. It doesn't want to coerce us or overwhelm us. He won't bounce us into responding. That's why Jesus says there's joy over a sinner. That means he means someone who knows that they're cracked, who repents. The 99 who think they're okay. More lost than we could imagine, more love than we'll ever know. And I want to finish by just inviting you to do a thought experiment with me. I want you to imagine that if you're not say you're not a Christian here, you're not a follower of Christ, and you're just thinking or looking at, I just want you to do a thought experiment. Imagine that you are a Christian. Imagine that you've given your life to Christ. Imagine that sense of darkness you brought and you put at the foot of the cross and you left it there, and you feel that your relationship with God has been restored. Now I know it's not going to happen, never happen. But just supposing it did, do the thought experiment, because the question is, how would you feel about your sense of self-worth in that case? Okay? What would it look like? And I think 2 things. First, instead of relying on your need to earn others' approval, you'd begin instead to rely on a love that will never go away, that will never get tired, that no matter how much you screw up, no matter how much you continue to crack things up, it's always for you. You're home. your home. And that's what you base your worth on. And that's what forms your inner sense of who you are. That's the first thing. Your sense of worth is grounded in God's unconditional love. But then second, as you embark on this journey of being a follower of Jesus, you'll begin to develop a new relationship with your achievements. You'll still want to do stuff in life because you'll learn and discover that God made you in his own image, that you bear the image of God. And as he's creative, you're creative. That's why every one of you in here, you sense something of your greatness. You know you're good at stuff. Because you're made in the image of God, although that image is tarnished and cracked through human sin, but its residue is there. And as a Jesus follower, you begin once again to sense your true greatness, which is to be creative and curious, to make a difference in the world as he is creative and beautiful and makes beautiful things, and you'll follow in his footsteps, and your achievements will grow out of who you are, but not be the basis of who you are. Do you see the difference? Your achievements will be the expression of your worth, but not the basis of it, the foundation of it. The foundation of it is who you are as God's disciple, Jesus' follower, his child, the orphan who came home, who is loved endlessly by God himself. That's who you are. That's your worth. That's your significance. But now out of that, you want to make a difference in the world. You want to be creative. You want to serve others. So let's say you score that impossible goal and they carry you out on their shoulders. Let's say you got that first and you take it home, and you're more alive in that moment than you can ever know. Let's say that you played that cello so beautifully, the audience were mesmerized that evening. As a Christian, I'd want to say to you, feel God's pleasure as you, bearing his image, did that so well. You did it. You did it. That's part of your greatness. But as you walk out and you step over a beggar, an alcoholic, unconscious in the gutter, don't think for 1 minute that being a great cellist or rugby player or got a first in God's eyes makes you one bit more important than that person, because he loves him too, even if he doesn't want to know it. And so our achievements are an expression of who we are. We can be great at rugby, we can be great at academics, but nothing of what we achieve makes us any more important. And if you're a Christian here, just remember that. When you achieve, or even when you fail, say, this doesn't affect who I am and my basic sense of being loved. It allows you to say, I'm good at that. I think I'm better than others at that. It just doesn't make me one measure more important than the others, because I'm just a child of God. So I'm not going to pretend, by the way, that when you become a follower of Jesus, all this happens overnight. You know, you ask if you're not a follower of Christ, ask the ones who are here. You'll see that they still hunger after recognition as well, because old habits die hard, don't they? And when you've been brought up on a lifetime of approval seeking, it's not going to be easy to shift your sense of worth to its true home again. That's why being a Jesus follower is called discipleship, a following. That's why it's a learning process. It's a journey that we're on. And like I said earlier, I'm really old, and I'm still struggling with this, to find my sense of worth rooted in God's love for me rather than what I try to achieve. But starting that journey, if you're open-minded to it, to open your heart to God's forgiveness, saying that's something for me, you'll be embarking on the greatest adventure of your life. That's my conviction. more lost than you ever know, but more loved than you ever imagined.